Welcome to our Road to Recovery series, a series of conversations helping entrepreneurs and families think ahead strategically to what a post-pandemic world might look like. This is the fifth installment in our series, exploring higher education. To catch up on other conversations, such as private capital markets, innovations in the supply chain, the economic recovery, and the implications for buying or selling your business, please visit our website at balentine.com. I'm Adrian Cronje, and I'm the CEO at Balentine. At Balentine, we're focused on serving the needs of entrepreneurs and intergenerational families. As an independent wealth management firm, many of our clients have made difficult decisions or watched their adult kids wrestle with a decision recently about going back to their place of higher education. Some going back to living on campus at the university, others deciding about in-person or virtual instruction, and yet others are more of a hybrid approach. And as that is all underway now, it has prompted conversations about the long-term implications, such as how will education be impacted permanently by the coronavirus of 2020? Is virtual and hybrid learning a new normal? What should the price of higher education be? To address these important questions, we've brought together a group of panelists today to talk about what school systems have learned through the pandemic and what university boards and leadership are discussing in regard to the long-term implications of the pandemic on higher education. Each panelist brings a unique and complementary vantage point to the conversation. Firstly, Sachin Shailendra. Sachin is currently the chair of the Board of Regents of the University System of Georgia, so he brings to us his vantage point of boardroom conversations and what the leaders of public institutions are dealing with in our home state. Secondly, Michael Schoenfeld. Michael is the Vice President for Public Affairs and Government Relations and Chief Communications Officer for Duke University, and he will talk to us about implications for private institutions and the educational environment in his home state of North Carolina. And finally, Dr. Ken England. Ken is the Vice President of Business and Finance at Agnes Scott College here in Atlanta. So Ken has had a front row seat into the financial implications to colleges and universities, especially those focused on liberal arts.
Sachin, Mike, Ken, thank you so much for investing time and being with us today. We appreciate it very much. You know, over the last 6 months, and in the last couple of months in particular, we at Balentine have been asked by clients and friends of the firm about important topics that go way beyond the ordinary course of what we do at our firm of financial planning, investment management, business advisory, and wealth and legacy. And from my seat, nothing has been greater top of mind than the issue of going back to school and also going back to colleges and universities and the state of higher education in our nation today. So we are very grateful that you all can be with us today to answer several questions that we have received. So I'd like to start with a question for each of you. What permanent changes to the higher education landscape has the pandemic caused from your vantage point? Tell us about how boards, cabinets, and faculty are adapting to the opportunities and challenges of a post-pandemic world. Sachin, let's start with you.
Thank you, Adrian. Well, I think everything in the post-pandemic world is changing and evolving on a daily basis. We've obviously gone from April to today. We started our fall semester about 2 months ago with a hybrid classing online, which is some sort of online class with some in-person classes. We've gone online in a lot of classes, and we've also gone in person in a lot of classes. So we're evolving as the pandemic has evolved. There's no good answer to how the future looks on this, but every day is a different challenge for us.
I'm sure it is. Mike, what about from a private college perspective? What would you say to what the pandemic has caused from both an opportunity and a challenge perspective?
So a couple of things. First, I think that the notion, we always talk about the notion of flexibility and resilience as great, tremendous assets for students and for the institution. And clearly, operating in a pandemic world has put those two traits at a premium. So the ability to move quickly, the ability to move thoughtfully, the ability to have some agility in the way that you both deliver education, and also work with on your business model, and work with your students and with your faculty and with your various stakeholders. Pretty much every part of society has a level of almost unprecedented, certainly in our lifetime, level of uncertainty, and colleges and universities are no different. The only exception, I think, is that, as you have heard from your clients, the public expects or demands a level of certainty from colleges and universities that we're clearly not able to give them, but we're certainly trying.
Yeah, that's well said. That theme of agility and flexibility is an important one. You know, in a previous Road to Recovery series, former CEO of Home Depot, Frank Blake, reminded everybody how important it was to be nimble and agile in your decision making. So it's interesting to hear that has permeated in our university system as well. Ken, let's talk a little bit about the liberal arts perspective. You've been the vice president for finance at Agnes Scott College for a little over 2 years. And by the way, congratulations on some of these recognitions that you all received over the last couple of weeks. Why don't you start by telling us about that?
Oh, absolutely, Adrian. We were voted the most innovative liberal arts college in the country 3 years in a row, number 2 for teaching. I think what permeates with Agnes Scott is that idea of innovation. And as my fellow colleagues on the panel had mentioned, liberal arts colleges, higher ed in general, can move at a snail's pace. And nothing has pushed us to think more innovatively and creatively than this pandemic. And I think what our faculty have learned, what us as a cabinet have learned, is that online education does not mean less than. I think there was always some of this sentiment that, the in-class instruction was at the core of who we are as a liberal arts college. But when you strip away everything else and the students aren't here and there's no extracurricular activities, your curriculum stands on its own. And at Agnes Scott, obviously, our curriculum is strong. And so adapting quickly and delivering that content in a different way has been something that this pandemic has forced us to do that will certainly live on. I've heard from multiple faculty who are absolutely excited about the opportunities that they can utilize in a dual mode type of curriculum. I think they've adapted relatively well. The first spring, we sent students home and had to adjust rapidly. This fall, we are fully online. We are looking at a reduced occupancy for the spring, but this fall, faculty worked tirelessly through the summer to develop course content online. Again, as I said, your curriculum will stand on its own when it is of high quality, and ours is. But that's one thing that this pandemic has taught us is be able to adjust and learn new things and then carry those things moving forward when we are post-COVID, which I hope is very soon.
Yeah, let's all hope so. Those are great examples of innovation and adaptability from a faculty and cabinet perspective. Michael, have you seen other examples of innovation and adaptability from that perspective other than learning to do classes in a dual mode?
Absolutely, and I would not underestimate in any way the scale of the adaptability. It's very easy for people to say that colleges are sclerotic, that decision making is slow, that nothing happens. That is, there's just enough of that to prove a stereotype. But if you look at a place like Duke, for instance, on March 8th of 2020, we had 6,000 classes on the campus for available for our undergraduates. 0 of them were online. We
Wow.
never had an online class for undergraduates. On March 11th, we had 6,000 courses
Wow.
that had pivoted to online. Were they all of the highest quality across the board? No, there was very much a learning process that went on for a lot of people. But the ability to make those changes, the technological ability, the pedagogical ability, and let's not also underestimate the faculty governance ability. And my colleagues at Ken and Sachin are well aware that university leadership, a president or a vice president doesn't wave a wand and say, today we're going to change the curriculum, or today we're going to change the requirements for admission. Those are things that have literally 1,000 years of history built into them. So I think one of the, it will probably never be told this way, but one of the great stories of innovation and flexibility and resilience and agility in the U.S. in this time of pandemic, it is the higher education system. And now not everybody has done it equally well or equally effectively. But if you look at just the sheer volume of 5,000 institutions adapting to this all at once with very different financial models, with very different governance and leadership and political constraints, I think it's pretty extraordinary.
Wow, 6,000 courses online overnight. That's remarkable. Sachin, as chairman of the Board of Regents for the state of Georgia, what do you think the pervasive adaptation of online schooling means for the business model of higher education, at least from a public, university and college perspective?
Adrian, I think that what we've found is that while our students do like online, we've found that 90 to 95% of our students want some sort of semblance of in-person teaching. The online process has been good. We in April, when we went online, we went fully online within a week of the pandemic. So we have a lot of good experience with that. I think that the children do like online education. I think it's with some sort of hybrid model, it seems to work for us. And we're still evaluating how that works in the long term for us.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Ken, you've been at Agnes Scott for a little over 2 years. I know that because I've been a trustee at Agnes Scott College for quite a while, and it's been a huge privilege for me to contribute back to my wife's alma mater. But the liberal arts business model has been challenged for some time, and in the lead up to this year, we were already talking about the steps we needed to take to make our endowment more resilient and to give us the flexibility to be nimble and agile. Why don't you give us a sense of some of the conversations that you and Lee and the board are having about the underlying business model and how COVID might have accelerated trends that were already in place before the March of this year?
Yeah, that's a perfect lead in, Adrian. When we talk about the business model liberal arts colleges, you're seeing that nationwide. So this is not something that is specific to Agnes Scott. It is really challenging the private smaller liberal arts institutions. And what I always like to say is that COVID hasn't caused this issue. COVID sort of accelerated some of the conversations that we're having. I think what we're learning here, and what I have learned and due to Lee Zach's leadership, is that we've got to very rapidly diversify our revenue streams. We cannot be, growth financially on the backs of the undergraduate enrollment population alone is not enough to sustain an institution long term. That looking broadly at graduate programs, at other auxiliary revenue opportunities, really thinking creatively, looking at it, knowing that at the core, we obviously are an institution of higher learning, and nothing will ever change that. But reviewing our business model for efficiencies where we can, ensuring that everything that we do at Agnes Scott is core to our mission, which is to educate women to think deeply and live honorably. And so as we begin to expand that, I think that we are learning now that there are different ways. As I mentioned, online education is something that our faculty did an excellent job adapting to. I think it has opened their eyes in many ways in terms of how we can deliver what content without being in the traditional classroom setting. with that becomes a multitude of opportunities for us, particularly in the graduate arena. And more importantly, I think when we look at Agnes Scott and the business model, liberal arts has long been under the scrutiny that it doesn't always lead to a job. That has always been the critique of the liberal arts education. What we are really focusing on at Agnes Scott right now is postgraduate success. Now that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but for us, it is either leading to a graduate program or onto a career. And so as we look to tweak the model, diversify revenue streams, and connect a sense of purpose and output for our students to justify really who we are and what we want to do. But again, COVID has sort of accelerated many of those conversations. Obviously, for us and many others, the loss in room and board for not having students on campus has been significant, and one that is now we consider a threat moving forward. So we've got to position ourselves with our business model so that we are efficient and effective in everything that we do, and that we don't find ourselves in sort of this last minute pivot that we're having to make right now budgetarily as we continue to work through and take guesses at what spring looks like. But COVID has accelerated those conversations, but those conversations were already happening. And now we have even greater resolve to solve the overall business model of the college and to ensure that Agnes Scott comes out of this pandemic an even stronger institution than it ever was.
I think that's well said. Well, we don't want to make light of this public health emergency and the crisis that so many people are feeling. Certainly in every crisis, there is an opportunity, and I've seen and watched how we as a board at Agnes Scott have got about helping cabinet and faculty and everybody at Agnes Scott pivot towards a future where there's a higher degree of uncertainty. So those are helpful first round set of comments about innovation and adaptation from cabinet and faculty, and a little bit about board concerns about the financial model and its resiliency. I want to turn now to a student's perspective, and I'd like, if you will indulge me, to read you some very, very provocative comments that I read in Barron's a couple of weekends ago, which has certainly prompted a lot of our clients to ask questions about our views on this, and I'd like to ask each of you to respond once I've had a chance to read them. So for those people who don't know who Professor Aswath Damodaran is, he is at the New York University's Business School and is often called the Dean of Valuation Theory. And his very provocative comments a couple of weekends ago said this: "What's different about this crisis is for the first time the inertia in higher education might be getting shaken because parents are seeing their kids at home and recognizing how little substance there is behind so many university classes. Students are looking at what they're missing about universities, and classes are not even making the top 10 list." Professor Damodaran says, "I've written many times that college has gotten so expensive that although students should go if they can, it's a losing financial proposition for many. That's true even considering the higher earnings of graduates and the wide availability of grants and loans. Of course, it doesn't factor in the many non-financial benefits of college like career fulfillment and statistically better health, nor does it factor in dropouts in slowpokes, unfortunately. Only 60% of college students have earned degrees within 6 years of starting. Since I started writing about college prices over a decade ago, they've climbed another 45%. That's double the rate of inflation. For me, college has been an excellent deal, but the system has simply become too burdensome for many. The Yales or Harvards or even the NYUs might survive, but further down the hierarchy, colleges without prestige and brand name are going to find themselves under assault." Sachin, how would you respond to Professor Damodaran?
Well, I think his concerns are definitely valid, Adrian. But we at the system over the past 5 years have a rate of less than 0.9% of increase in tuition over the past 5 years, which is that's less than inflation. I mean, we're looking at this, making sure college is affordable for every student, making sure that we're able to provide that quality service for the children. We have a very robust program in making sure that we don't raise tuition higher than what people can afford, and making sure that they get value for their degree. So we've been looking at that as a board for the past 7 years that I've been on the board. and over the past 5 years, obviously 0.9% is pretty minuscule in raising tuition. The other thing is that we did not raise tuition this year. We had a 0% across the board, and that's kind of what we do. We take it to heart to make sure that our children are getting value from our degrees.
Thank you. Mike, what about from a private college perspective? Have you all considered reducing rates, giving money back to people who don't come on campus for room and board? How have you sought to put a moat around your business model and build the brand name?
So I think there are a couple of things to keep in mind. First, the vast majority, there are 25 million college students in America. The vast majority of them, the vast overwhelming majority of them, are in public institutions. They're in systems like the University of Georgia. They're in community colleges. The number of students and the percentage of students who are in private research universities like Duke or private liberal arts colleges like Agnes Scott is relatively small compared to the overall college-going universe, and the amount that they pay in tuition is and other fees is also vastly different. So I think that that one can't just say what about private colleges or what about college in general, because our system, to the extent that we have one, is incredibly diverse. And there is a very important, a vital and essential role for the public institutions that deliver education, that are partnerships and investments on the part of the state, private liberal arts colleges that have a very specific kind of education model, and a private research university like Duke that has an academic medical center and exists. We all exist in very different parts of the education universe. So I think unfortunately, one of the great disservices that a lot of critics and a lot of observers have done for the public is lump all of these together. And typically, what happens is that those institutions at the very highest end, they represent a fairly small sliver of the pie, but they tend to define it in the public awareness. If you add up, interesting fact, if you add up all of the undergraduate students in the Ivy League schools and the major private universities that tend to dominate, for better or worse, the media coverage, you're talking about 150,000 students. Mm-hmm. Out of 25 million. But that defines that, again, that tends to define our public perception. So now that I've given you my rant at the beginning, I would say that every institution, ours certainly, is acutely aware of and acutely concerned about cost issues. Our model, which is again specific to us, costs about $130,000 per student. Costs about $130,000 per student to deliver. We charge about $70,000, between $70,000 and $75,000, tuition, room, board, etc. We collect about $35,000 of that on average. So it costs $130,000. We charge $75,000. We collect $35,000. That does not sound like a very good recipe for a business model, which is why the higher ed business model is, at least in a private research university, is very, very different from what it is in many other places. We do this, and we're able to sustain this because of the social good, because of philanthropy, because of investments, and the various other elements. So there's no single dial that we can turn or that we will turn to change things overnight. The demand we at the same time we have a demand in which we're declining the opportunity and the desire of somewhere between 95 and 98%, 93 and 95% of the people who would like to come to Duke. So I think that it is a much more complicated question than lower tuition, increased financial aid, and voila, you have the recipe. And I think it's highly unique and highly individualistic to each institution.
Thank you for that thoughtful answer. You sound like me ranting about the media trying to sell us stories and making general statements, right? Where would we be if we could deal in calm facts and logic, right? So Ken, you mentioned in an earlier response how you were trying to connect the liberal arts approach to finding a job. And I know Agnes Scott is, of course, very proud of being ranked very high for social mobility and very high for best value. Why don't you talk a little bit about that and some of the things you all are doing at a private liberal arts education at Agnes Scott to really differentiate your brand?
Yeah, I think Michael did an excellent job when he talked about the social good that we are able to provide our students. We are very generous with our scholarships and grants at Agnes Scott College because we value, one, racial and economic diversity amongst our student population. We value the diversity that brings into the classroom and outside. But when we really start looking at those that take greatest issue with cost of college, it's those that are really have invested heavily in an education that has not resulted in the outcomes they had hoped for, right? So these are the folks that they feel they were sold a bill of goods when they entered and now they've left and they're burdened with this debt at the end of the day. So Agnes Scott's core mission has been to connect students with their long-term mission and stand beside them the entire way, whether that is going on to a graduate program or moving on to a full-time career. Because at the end of the day, it is saying, look, the liberal arts education will challenge you to think critically. It will teach you skills in the workplace that are valuable. Working amongst a variety of constituents, learning how to deal with difficult situations. And so we believe that the liberal arts education lends itself to leading students to their outcomes that they desire. And so, obviously generous with our grants and scholarships to promote social mobility, which is important for our country right now. But it's also walking lockstep with our students throughout the process, throughout their curriculum, to ensure that they achieve the goals that they want. Again, graduate school or a job, but that's the postgraduate success that we really, really focus on, so that a student is not sitting somewhere saying, I was sold a bill of goods, that they are able to leave Agnes Scott with the knowledge that they need to be successful individuals and productive members of society. So that's how we've taken this. And I do think that the conversation is a fair one for the industry in general. But as I think Michael and Sachin have shown, no single model fits every institution. It's very varied and very different, and institutions take different approaches to help students navigate and ensure that they're ultimately successful following graduation.
Adrian, I just wanted to add something. Ken was incredibly. I can't wait to record this because Ken was so eloquent in describing describing the role of an education. I do want to just punctuate that what we're talking about here is I think the importance and the value of outcomes, not inputs, and measuring and assessing colleges and a college education not based on what goes into it, but what individuals get out of it, and the education, the network, the support, and the return on the investment. That's you see that at Agnes Scott, you see that at the University of Georgia system, you see that at Duke. That's why these institutions, I think, are valuable and essential for students and valuable and essential for society.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. What gets measured gets done. And so it's interesting to watch the system pivot towards measuring outcomes. And Ken, promoting civilized, mutually respectful discourse, what kind of radical agenda is that, man?
I know, isn't it crazy?
So Sachin, I want to ask a question that a lot of clients have asked me. And I'm curious to see whether you have seen this happen. many have thought that, this is a lost year with the pandemic. And then at some point when we have a vaccine and a therapy, life will resume back like it was last year. And many have considered just sitting this year out. Have you seen across the system many students opting to sit this year out, take a gap year, or have you generally seen people just getting on with the new normal?
Adrian, we've actually seen an uptick in our enrollment, I think due to the fact that we are somewhat in person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the students have wanted to have in-person experience. Granted, that has been a challenge, and we've had to be innovative in how we do that. Again, we talked about the hybrid learning that we've been doing, and also, we've adapted a lot of our college classrooms to provide for this COVID environment. And we're doing testing on campus all the time. So I think that our enrollment has actually upticked in the system, which is kind of interesting. Granted, I think nationwide is probably you see more people taking some sort of gap year, but at our system, we've seen an uptick.
That's very encouraging. Mike, what about you?
So our undergraduate enrollment doesn't grow. We have a fixed number, so we're not looking to grow every year. We saw a slight uptick this year in the students we have about 7,000 undergraduates. Normally, we have about 6,600 enrolled right now. We saw a slight uptick in less than we expected, but more than in past years of students taking leaves of absence for a semester or deferrals. We actually have seen an increase in our graduate and professional student enrollment.
That's encouraging. Ken, what about enrollment and retention trends at Agnes Scott?
Coming into it as a CFO, you sort of look at what worst case scenario could be, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that our trends were pretty much on point with our retention numbers in the mid 80% for freshman to sophomore. We did see a handful of deferrals for the first year class, those that are simply saying, let's take a step back and watch and see what the landscape does. But students, whether it's online or not, I think are banking for the college experience, and many of them, even our institutions that like Agnes Scott itself, who are fully online for fall, they're looking at spring with the hopes that there can be some sort of normalcy coming back. I think with that, it is important to note the developmental aspect of a college education and the social interaction that is important for our college students. And so having, much like the Georgia system that Sachin has said, and getting some interaction in person is important developmentally for our students. We got to know where they are on the overall spectrum of growth. And so I think a lot of them are looking at the spring semester saying, I hope we can get back to some sort of normalcy. And then obviously there's those that are saying, for our deferrals, that are saying, I'll just sit this one out and wait. I think either decision is a perfectly rational one. And we'll welcome them next fall when they decide to come. But yeah, it's a big challenge for families, especially for parents or grandparents raising college age students. It is the monetary proposition of sending your kid online and paying full tuition is tough. But again, we're hoping for arrival in spring and then some normalcy beyond that.
Yeah, tough decision making for sure. But your comments, all y'all's comments, make me believe that the higher education universe is quite healthy and doing well and thriving. Perhaps not what we might be reading in the media. So that's very encouraging news. So we've talked a lot today about innovation and adaptability from faculty and from cabinets. We've talked about the business model and its resiliency. We've talked a little bit about the value proposition from a student perspective. I'd like to end off our session today by asking each of you about a thin silver lining to all of this. What conversations do you see happening at the board level, at the cabinet level, at the faculty level, even at the student level, that folks are now having as a result of this global health pandemic that could change higher education for the better? Sachin, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Adrian. I think that what we're seeing right now is that the fact that higher education is also being nimble enough to work through these challenges. And whereas everyone says, it goes back to Michael and Ken's comments earlier, is, oh, higher education, we can't move fast. I mean, look at all the online courses that were provided in the spring semester quickly. If you look at us as a system, being able to provide in-person instruction during the fall, we're 2 months in, how we adapted and how we're able to move quickly while adapting to the global pandemic, which nobody's ever seen before, Adrian, I think has been outstanding for our system and our education process.
I think that's well said, it's particularly for an industry that's not known for its nimbleness and agility, or at least historically not known for it. Mike, what about you?
Yeah, I'd like to just bracket one comment there. There are significant challenges to higher education, financial challenges, business model challenges. We're seeing that here as well, and there's a period of disruption, much like many other industries that we're going through. I'd say. The upside is that we are seeing from a leadership, from a governance, from a curriculum, education, research, things that seemed impossible or inconceivable at breakfast a couple of days ago became possible during lunch and became sort of policy by dinner. And we saw that on the downside as we were sort of going into a crisis situation, but we're seeing it, every day in the way that we organize our instruction, the way that we do our research, and the way that we serve students, and the fact that we have we are a global institution. We have a university in China. We have a university in Singapore. One of the interesting things about this is the kind of innovation that we had hoped to see from having this network and took a while to catch on over a period of 10 years. Actually accelerated pretty darn quickly over the last 9 or 10 months, and that's been a tremendous value that is only going to increase for us in the future.
I love that metaphor of breakfast, lunch, and dinner to capture the speed of the moment. That's very, very well said. Ken, what's the thin silver lining for you all at Agnes Scott?
I think it as we mentioned earlier, it has accelerated some conversations. As Michael has noted, there are challenges in higher education, and this has accelerated some of those conversations, those very important conversations, to ensure that we continue to produce a high quality education for our students. I think it's also highlighted the important role of faculty governance on campus. As Michael again noted, the breakfast, lunch, and dinner, this was a lot of work for our faculty. This was a lot of work for our faculty. Many of them worked all summer unpaid, right? They don't work during the summer, but they gave up their summer vacations to get ready for our students and to develop a strong curriculum that would exceed the expectations of our students. And I think lastly, Adrian, I would say this pandemic has been challenging in so many ways, but it has strengthened our resolve that what we are doing is important and that our existence and our financial strength to continue to provide what we provide is important. And I think despite the long hours, the 7 days a week work, I think we can all look at each other as colleagues across higher ed systems, from private liberal arts to state-run system, and say what we do has value. What we do has value, and locking arms with each other and ensuring that we're looking out for our number one asset, which is the student.
Yeah, Ken, I think that's very well said. I've seen firsthand how this crisis has brought all of our constituencies closer together to having these tough conversations. And thank you for the reminder to everybody about the sacrifice that faculty makes to make this all happen. I think often in this discourse, we lose sight of that, and we can't forget that. So, gentlemen, I can't thank you enough for your time today. I found this to be a very helpful, broad-ranging conversation that has answered many of the top-of-mind questions from clients and friends of our firm about the state of higher education. Before we round out our conversation, I'll ask each of you for any parting comments or wisdom, starting with you, Sachin.
I think we are just excited that you had the opportunity to talk to you today, Adrian, and tell a little bit about the University System of Georgia and our approach to higher ed in the future on the pandemic. So we appreciate it and look forward to seeing you soon.
Sachin, it's our pleasure, and thank you for your leadership and role in volunteering as chairman of the Board of Regents. It's important work. Mike, any parting shots from you?
Well, I also want to thank you. It's great to be with everybody here and appreciate the opportunity. I would just say that in higher education, we tend to take the long view, the very long view. These institutions are highly adaptable and have been around for a long time because they do very important work, and I think they will continue to do that for a long time to come.
Thank you. Ken?
Adrian, I want to echo my fellow panelists and thank you for the opportunity for us to share our perspectives. Again, we will get through this. We will get through this, and we will be a better institutions because of it, and we should never forget that.
I think that's very well said. On that optimistic note, thank you very much, everybody, for your time. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much again for joining our panel conversation today. Sachin, Mike, and Ken left us, I think, 3 key takeaways. Firstly, that there has been a burst of innovation and adaptability in the higher education industry, much along the lines of what has happened in the for-profit sector, a theme we touched on in our Road to Recovery series on the post-pandemic economy. That's startling for me because higher education is an industry that we don't normally think of as being particularly agile and nimble. Secondly, the panel acknowledged that the pandemic had accelerated conversations about the resiliency of the higher education business model. There is an acknowledgement of student concerns about benefits versus costs and a clear pivot towards measuring outcomes. And then thirdly, enrollment and retention trends seem to be positive across the board. And so perhaps the state of higher education is far better than what we're reading about in the media today. To watch other episodes of our Road to Recovery series, please visit our website at balentine.com. For those in the audience who are entrepreneurs, please visit firstgenerationwealth.com to learn more about my forthcoming book, a guide to helping wealth creators think through the many implications of the transitions they will experience as business owners. Thank you very much.